Yeah, narcissism is not just a description of your actions, it's an actual like diagnosis,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah. I think that probably everybody has a bit of that, though. I mean, you gotta be self-aware to realize it in yourself. A lot of people see it in others, and then they don't realize it in myself. Like, I've noticed myself having narcissistic tendencies, but not like a, full-blown narcissistic person, but I think everybody has some of it, you know?
And with the new age of social media and the fact that we all have this voice that we never had before, I think people feel like it's their duty to pick a side and it's their duty to defend their thoughts as if there's some kind of like omniscient
Yeah.
being.
I mean, and yeah, with social media, it almost like rewards those behaviors, because like puts you in like a lot of times you get caught in like an echo chamber and like the more it's like even in culture, like narcissism is kind of like rewarded. I mean, if you look at people are like hip hop culture is kind of narcissistic if you think about it. Like, look at my chain, I'm the best, this and that. Like huge inflated ego.
Best rapper alive type of thing. Like,
Yeah.
so how many people have you heard say, "I'm the best rapper alive"?
It's a part of, like, rap music, you have to call yourself the best or you didn't make a rap song.
Mhm, mhm, and that goes with sports, it goes with any competition, really.
Sure,
I
yeah.
think it's inherent in our culture too to be so competitive, and that also kinda goes along the lines of, like, manifesting and how people get really caught in, positive thought, and they think that, like, as long as you think positively, you think confidently that, like, whatever you're thinking is gonna happen.
Yeah, I mean, the reason it's a problem, and that's with, like, most things too, is, like, because there is some truth to it, but it's a lot of times it's the way that this manifestation is, like, how it's being showed to people, like, how to do it, like, you can just manifest something, make, like, a what do they call those boards?
Like a vision board or
Like a vision
something.
board, yeah, like, as long as you think about it and you'll end up getting it. But the key is you do manifest things. You have to be determined and visualize, like, you getting those successes, but the key is the work in between, It's not the manifesting isn't where the results come from. The manifesting is what begins the work that the results come from.
You're so, so right. And like you said, it's like the manifesting part, it's just a small piece of it. And there's so much more in there's more that you can look into, more that you can study. There are more ways that you can train your mind to like positively manifest things in your life, but it's not as if it's some sort of magic. Like if I think that I'm going to become an Olympic runner, like I'm not going to become an Olympic runner at my age and like what I
Mhm.
do, like there's certain things that you can't do. And of course like people would say, well, that's not what, the manifesting doctrine is about. It's not telling you that you can do like ungodly, things or godly divine things by just thinking about it, which is why I think, like, yeah, these people are correct in a way, like you
Mhm.
said, like they're getting a piece of it, but it's all in the work. It's what follows the positive thought.
But yeah, but like I was saying, it is important still because first, in order to achieve anything, you have to believe that you can do it first. Because it is true that like there's such thing as like a self-fulfilling prophecy. Like you have to have faith, like blind faith in a sense of things that are impossible. Like I like the story of the Wright brothers. So this is how like faith can work in like even a scientific manner or something. See, at the time, human beings could not fly. That was a fact. We can't fly. We're not going to be able to. But they had faith. They had to believe that you could first. So they put their faith in a belief that no, human beings can fly. If nobody had that belief or manifested that idea into reality, it never would have happened. So if everybody walked around the world saying, "No, we can't fly," we would have never created airplanes. So I think that's a good uh, example of believing in something impossible per se that maybe isn't, but the belief comes first, and then it's possible to actually do some of these things. Like I talked about this before. Like I asked you one time if do you believe that it's possible to know everything, meaning everything, like not every trivial fact, but everything as in like who am I? What is reality? That type, like the big questions. Is it even possible to know? And if you say it's not possible, then it's not possible. That's a self-fulfilling prophecy. But if you believe it is, and this is like kind of manifesting, I guess, but if you believe that it is, then at least it gives you the ability to start the work to get to that place. But that's why, like for most of my life, I believed that you couldn't know those things. And in that belief, I never tried, you know? So I never, if I walked around thinking it's impossible to know what reality is or all this other, like these big questions, if I think it's impossible, then I'll never even attempt to learn it or to understand it. And then since changing that belief, I've learned more about myself and, more abstract ideas and just a whole different view of reality itself based off of just a belief that I can figure out things about myself that and reality itself that I thought were impossible.
And there's a difference between intellectually believing something and acting as if something is real. Like Jordan Peterson talks about this in terms of Christianity and the Bible. He'll claim like the Bible itself, some of the more preposterous things that it might say may not be like intellectually, he may not believe those things. But if, say, he does believe certain parts of the Bible, or he acts as if some of these like core doctrines and like core lessons are real, then it may lead to prosperity and progress. And if it does, that's like its own type of truth.
Right, yeah, like the Sam Harris
Exactly.
Pearson argument over truth. Like, yeah, there's really two meanings to it. Like you could say like a fact, like anything that's you could read as a fact, but I can talk about that too. But then like I think the example uses like the arrow flies true, like straight and true. Like so that's just a different meaning of truth, I guess.
And that's a problem with language, is that we want to say that truth, that the definition that may be in the dictionary applies to all types of things that are real. And truth and real are two different things as well.
Yeah. Yeah, real is a tricky word too. I was having a conversation with somebody in a group online. They asked the question of like, what if dreams are real and the reality isn't, or something along those lines. And then it made me think like, well, why are you assuming that dreams aren't real? Like, what does real actually mean? Because I've going through like what I've been working on with like lucid dreaming and things of that nature, I've come to put a lot more stake in my dreams and kind of look at them as real, try to act better in them and do things in a different manner. And like I had a lucid dream a couple nights ago and it was unbelievably real. Like I it was so real that like I stopped and I was just looking at like a wall. It was like kind of like a cave wall and I was, like, looking at it, I was like, "This is so real." Like, I'm aware I'm dreaming, and, like, it was real as, you could look at close at it, every little detail and touch it, and I'm touching it and feeling it. It feels just like I would touch something now, and then it being a lucid dream, I told myself I'm gonna put my hand through it, and I could, and then I put my hands into this wall and started splashing it like water. It was solid and liquid at the same time, so it was, like, splashing up, and then it would land, and it was back solid, and I was, like, playing with it, and it was really crazy, but the point is, to me, that experience is real. That's a real experience I had. Just because it can't be replicated or I can't prove it to somebody, it doesn't make it unreal. And a lot of people believe or they act as if something has to be provable to be true. And that's where I like to say, that truth precedes proof. Something can be true and unprovable, or something can be true and unproven, this or that. Like, for instance, like if you're telling the truth to somebody, or if you're lying to somebody, you can't prove it, but you know which one is true, things of that nature. But and especially when you're talking about like spiritual stuff, none of it is provable. And that's why I tell everyone you can't give somebody the answers. Truth cannot be spoken. But the good thing is that you can find all the answers you want yourself from within, but you can't prove it to anybody else or tell it to them. You can point them in the right direction. That's about it.
Yeah, it's the same with a psychedelic experience too. You know, a lot of people describe their experiences on psychedelics as realer than real. And I mean, you can't validate that with language or with any kind of like normal precedence of fact, but it is and if you have that experience, and it's not just if you have an experience with psychedelics, certain meditative experiences and things like that will give you the same more real than real feeling. It's like you're puncturing into like a base level foundational reality that lies beyond what the physical world can show us.
You're right. Yeah, I agree. Because there's like states of consciousness and like you said, realer than real. It's like like in a DMT experience, like you sometimes you can like become something beyond a human, like something beyond your five senses. I think that's what people mean when they say realer than real for these type of experiences is because you're experiencing something that is impossible in, your normal waking consciousness of being a human being. It's impossible, but it's possible because it's happening to you right then and there. It's just beyond the limitations of your human consciousness, your five senses. And it's realer than real is definitely real.
And another detail of the realer than real experience is when you go into especially like a DMT or a mushroom experience or something like that, the thing that really makes it feel realer than real is there's structure there. Like there is something there that follows some kind of rules or laws, or like it feels like the same sort of structure that our reality has. It's just vastly different. And it seems that it takes different types of perceptive senses to be able to perceive it. But I think that the structural nature of the places you go on psychedelics really add to the realer than real feeling of them.
Oh yeah, I definitely agree. And like the same can be said like in a dream. I've noticed that like different dreams have different laws. It's like in each dream you're in a different reality that allows different things to happen. And then if you become lucid enough, then you can kind of create those laws yourself. But in each dream, like it's not everything isn't as coherent and it's not all as set as things are here in waking reality. But I've heard this notion. I don't know if I necessarily believe it or not, but if you think of reality as being like a more of a dream, and I've heard this as like kind of a theory that we are all creating reality through our consciousness. Like it's a collective dream. So that's why we can't become lucid and change things because we all together agree what the laws are. Whereas your own dream at night, you're the only one creating that reality, your individual consciousness. And then that allows you, that's why you can become lucid and change fundamental laws. Like I said, like you can turn solid into water and put your hands through it. But you can't do that in this reality because all of us are agreeing together, whether we like it or not, or whether we realize it, we're agreeing on what the laws are. And it's interesting because if you think about it that way, that kind of means if you can convince the whole population to truly believe in something impossible, that it could manifest into like a reality. So, like, I heard somebody talk about, I think it was Paul Check. I'm not gonna say it as well as he did, but he was talking about how we kind of manifested something like COVID. Like, basically what he was getting at is if enough people think something is real and we spend enough resources investigating it and trying to find it, that you will end up creating it. Like let's say initially, I'm just using COVID because it's something recent we can all look at. You can create a problem if enough people truly believe it, and if you put enough resources into that thing, like, you can create enough tests to find something that wasn't there before. So maybe it was something that's always been there, and now you've just created a test to find it. If you put enough of a collective consciousness into something and enough resources into that thing that you'll end up creating it in a sense.
Maybe that's what evolution is, the collective agreement that we all, with our perceptions, move into a new sensory reality or a new sensory system of intaking information through our senses and then like regurgitating it into what we can like describe as real. So maybe like after a certain period of time, maybe that could just be like a mutation in the brain too, like a mutation within our senses that could just slightly tweak something as a result of our growth that allows us to collectively at the same time perceive reality in a way where we kind of move towards something together.
Also, what could go along with this is what was that guy's name on Aubrey Marcus's podcast, the one that recalls his past lives? Something
Um,
DeStefano?
yes, DeStefano. I forget his first name. What the hell was his first
I
name?
forget, but this man, he's on Aubrey Marcus' podcast a couple times, and he has memories of his past lives, like multiple past lives, and he was kind of born with a gift of like a higher consciousness, I guess you'd say. But he talks about in he remembers his life in like Atlantean times, like 10, 12,000 years ago, where they lived in a different reality because they had different collective beliefs. So basically, what he said, he talks about how the pyramids were built, that they were connected. They looked at, as today we look at technology as things we can create and use like material. They thought as of their body as their technology. So what they did as a culture was master their bodies and themselves. They were the technology. And in what basically he said, and it's weird because other people have theorized that this is how the pyramids were made, that somehow they were moving those stones with some kind of sound or acoustics. And what he said is basically that, like somehow, maybe because the whole collective believed in this reality, it allowed it to happen, that they were able to move these giant stones through certain sound frequencies. And each person mastered their body, went to like their whole school was different. It was about mastering the body, and they could basically form a connection with a certain element like fire, water, earth, and air, something like that. So each person, like if you were mastered earth, you'd be able to use these frequencies and move the earth, different stuff like that. But he was basically kind of going along the same lines of what I'm talking about is maybe 10, maybe 12,000 years ago, people had a different collective consciousness of what is possible in reality, which allowed them to do things that we can't do because our reality doesn't allow it based on our belief and consciousness.
The thing about him too is on a surface level, a lot of the stuff he says, like this kind of goes back to truth and like believing something as fact or acting as if it's true. A lot of the stuff he says, like if somebody just wrote down on paper like a question based off of a fact that he said and said like, did this man come from Atlantis and can he remember past lives? I would probably say, like, intellectually, no, I don't believe that. But what I can say is that the way that he expresses wisdom is so profound and it resonates so deeply with what I've experienced and what I've seen that it doesn't validate the fact that he can experience past lives, but it makes his argument worth listening to and worth taking in so that you can find the little tidbits of information that you resonate with and that can help you progress. The same way that Jordan Peterson would say you can take certain parts of the Bible and certain parts of mythology and things like that and use them in your life as like a practical truth as opposed to an intellectual truth.
Well, so do you believe that he is lying about the past lives thing?
No, because whether or not somebody's lying about something doesn't make what they're saying true or false. But
So,
I think it's important to recognize that.
so, um, so you don't believe he's lying. So, do you think that he actually experienced those things?
Probably,
Right.
yes. Again, I don't think that necessarily he's lying because I don't think his motivations are to deceive in order to achieve some sort of self gain. And the reason I say that is because when you look at somebody when they're speaking to you, you can normally tell if they're lying, if they're bullshitting you in a way that you can clearly see that they're trying to gain something from it. And you could definitely make an argument that this guy is trying to gain something because all of a sudden he came from the obscure Gaia network and Aubrey Marcus found him and now he's massive because he's been on Aubrey's podcast a bunch of times. So you could make the argument that like yeah, this guy is bullshitting everybody in order to bolster his own reputation and gain something from it. But when I listen to that guy talk, the wisdom that he has for such a young age, that's what I really pay attention to. I could give a shit less if he remembers some Atlantean song or something, you know? Honestly, like if I'm being completely honest, like I don't buy into like the one podcast that they did where he started off like singing some sort of like song that he learned from his past life in Atlantis. Like, okay, maybe. I do believe that he's not lying and that he experienced whatever he experienced
So that's where I'm getting. So if for him, say if he experienced it and he's telling the truth, he's not lying. So that's where I'm seeing the disconnect and why like if you don't believe it, but he experienced it, if you think like why wouldn't you believe it if you think he experienced it?
because I think experiential truth is potentially different than intellectual truth. And in order to intellectually believe something, it's similar to like the ghost phenomenon, like a paranormal phenomenon. You have to experience a paranormal phenomenon to believe it because it's so outside of the realm of evidence that we normally see things as truth. So, experientially, you'd have to have an encounter with a ghost to truly believe that this type of thing is real. And that's how I look at like psychedelic experiences. It's how I look at people like DeStefano. Um, I feel like they're not lying. They probably experienced it in some way, but there's 2 things that I'm not gonna do. I'm not gonna take what this person says as a literal intellectual fact, and I'm also not going to pathologize their experience as insanity or something else, or even lying. I'd like to take information where I can get it, and if it resonates with me and if it furthers my journey and it resonates with my heart, then I'm gonna take it for that and use it to whatever means I feel necessary, you know?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I believe that people can experience those things, but I don't know uh if it connects to an objective truth or whatever you'd like to call it, or like an intellectual truth. I don't know. But I do have a belief that people can experience things that can't be proven and that are impossible, like that aren't impossible, but we believe to be impossible. And like you were saying, basically, if you can bring truth out of it, like an absolute truth, like things that you can resonate with, like deeply, then I think it validates the experience as a true experience. I don't like there's different ways to look at it, I guess you'd say. Like as you put it, an intellectual truth, that would be something that you have to that has to be proven to you, I guess, you know. But I think it's a bit beyond that. I mean, I don't know with him personally, I don't know uh what he's experienced, but he definitely has an ability, if you ask me, to work with his consciousness in a way that most people have to work very hard to get to. Like, and one of the reasons I believe that he experiences other lives, like, not saying that those are true or whatever, like the same way you experience a different life in a dream. Like, it's not going to be provable, but you can experience it. Like, I once had a dream where I was a different person and it was strange. Like, I woke up and I was like, what was that? Like, I was like some guy, like, just like on a farm with like a family. And so I'm not going to say that was true and that was my past life, but I did experience like me in a different body or something. So I didn't gain any deep truth from it. It was just I woke up and it was really strange. But I think that people do have the ability to do that. And then especially if you look at the fact that, time isn't what we really think it is, like that you can kind of say that based off of what we were talking about last week a little bit with like Donald Hoffman saying that space time isn't fundamental, consciousness is, that would allow for consciousness to, like, it means you could experience all time at once. And that would be that, like, the idea is that time isn't linear, which that's basically proven through quantum mechanics that time isn't linear. They've showed particles time traveling, basically. So we know that time isn't linear. And then you can start to rationalize how it might be possible to experience a whole different time and have it be, I guess you could say, true. I don't know. But, that's the way I look at it because time is funny. So, I think it is possible, and then if you look at it as we are all ultimately one consciousness, like, split into different perspectives, that would mean that you, like, capital Y-U, can experience the consciousness of any living thing or unliving even, like, Aubrey Marcus, again, I'll go to him. He talked about a sober experience he had. He was laying in between his 2 girlfriends who were both on, uh, a high dose of mushrooms, like, so they were both, like, tripping intensely, and that was his night off, like, he was being sober that night. So he was sober, laying in between them, and then he had, uh, like a 4th, 5th dimensional experience, however you'd like to describe it, where he got into a state of mind that's kind of like a lucid dream where he could manifest objects and beings and stuff right in front of him. So, like, he was laying there soberly, but in a different state of consciousness where he could think of like a waterfall and then a waterfall would appear. And like he could basically, he was still his body, like kind of think of it like a lucid dream. So then he talked about he went further and he experienced the consciousness of a bumblebee where he was like experiencing what it felt like to be a bee. And like it was all he said he could feel was like the queen bee behind him, and it was in his mind like serve the queen, serve the queen. And like through an experience, he had the consciousness of a bee for a short period of time. So this like goes to the idea that as a single consciousness divided, you can kind of experience all consciousnesses or individual consciousnesses or however you want to word that, but you can experience other things like even in reading Robert Monroe, he was the guy who coined the term OBE, out of body experiences, basically astral travel. He writes about he was able to experience different animals, like the consciousness of a big cat. He was able to even experience a plant absorbing sunlight and like doing photosynthesis. So he talks about being able to do that stuff. And I don't know, I think that that stuff is possible. It just seems completely outlandish because it doesn't fit our culture and the way we look at reality at all. Like, we look at everything through a physicalist lens, like a materialism lens that says that everything is physical, time, space is fundamental, space-time, sorry. Space-time is fundamental, and we are so ingrained into that, that anything other than that sounds completely out of possibility of being real or true.
It reminds me also of near death experiences, which is super interesting because soon I'm going to be talking to Kyle Buller of Psychedelics Today. And he started his path. Well, he would probably say he started it earlier, but one of the big giant kickstarters for him was he had a really intense near death experience as a result of a snowboarding accident. Near death experiences are another form of this where it feels realer than real. It feels like you're quote unquote going home. It's comforting, it's beautiful. And who's to say that that's not a real experience? It goes beyond what intellectually we can grasp as evidential fact.
Mhm.
So it's another one of these circumstances where you're looking at a mystical type experience and you're trying to label it in the same way as rocks are hard and trees are wood and grass is green. Like
Mhm.
we these are just descriptions.
Right. And yeah, I'm glad that you brought up the near death experiences because there's a good show on Netflix. It's called Surviving Death. And there's like a couple episodes, but it's all about this. Like they talk to people who had near death experiences and it's super interesting. But there's like it seems to be when you hear the accounts of people who had near death experiences, there's so many similarities, but there's like kind of two different ones I've noticed where it seems like some near death experiences are kind of how you just described it, where it's almost like just like a DMT experience that you are, experiencing like a feeling of going home and like oneness and like comfortable familiarity, something like that, which is kind of how I felt like on sometimes on DMT. But also, a lot of people experience an out of body experience, which is like exactly what you are fully capable of doing without dying. So a lot of people who have a near death experience find themselves floating outside of their body, like looking down at the scene that just happened. And that's the same thing as astral travel or out of body experiences. They're both the same thing. Monroe just calls them OBEs because he didn't want mysticism attached to it. He wanted to approach it scientifically. So he called them OBEs. But like, he started one night, he just found himself floating above his body in bed, and then he ended up learning and, like, studying, trying to figure it out and mastering it. But the out of body experience is exactly what, uh, people describe in near death experiences. It's, like, the same thing. It's pretty crazy.
And there are lots of parallels with other mystical type experiences, which makes me believe that whatever structure that we were talking about earlier that is behind the psychedelic experience, it has other avenues, other ways of getting to it. And it to me that and this is almost scientific, when you can have two different, very different types of experiences brought on by two different stimuli, whether it be almost dying, having a lucid dream, taking a psychedelic, when those things communicate with each other and validate one another, there's something to that. And I think scientifically, as intellectuals, our scientists should be looking at these things.
Yeah, it's pretty wild that they don't. There are some, like, on the fringe, and it makes me think about, these questions are so you don't have to be some type of super genius to start asking them. And then if people like you and I can realize that there are some kind of answers and experiences you can have to get maybe answers or understand things a different way, it I kind of understand why the scientific community hasn't dove into it because a lot of them are, it's just a fact that they're dogmatic in a sense and stuck in one worldview and then excelling at that, which there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, it brings us all the beautiful technology and knowledge that we have, but there's something further than that. And you can see certain scientists, small groups of them, starting to investigate those things. But it makes me question even more that, like, the government doesn't have, like, crazy scientists or black projects where they're investigating this type of stuff, and I think that they are probably, because if we know this, then there are people who have unlimited resources that know this too and can investigate it in a very, serious way. Like, I don't wanna go too deep into, like, aliens or anything right now, we could do that on a different episode, but I was telling you the other day about, a program called, OSAP that the government had, like, in the I think it was, like, late '90s to early 2000s, like, I don't know, they did it for, like, around 10 years or something. It was, like, Advanced Aerospace Weapons Systems Application Program, something like that, and, yeah, I think that's it, and what they were, like, investigating UFOs and stuff like that they claimed aren't real, but they had a program that, was funded by millions of taxpayer dollars to investigate this stuff. And one of the things that they investigated was Skinwalker Ranch. And the reason that I bring this up is because from what I've heard and what you can look at from all the like FOIAs and Freedom of Information Act like documents and stuff, that was the first government program that really started looking into the stuff that we're talking about. So they use like millions of dollars worth of resources, government agents, and like top-notch scientists to investigate kind of the paranormal and things that don't seem to fit our idea of reality. So knowing that they did that and knowing that they got results. So that means that there has to be further study going on. That program has ended, but we didn't know that program existed while it existed. So you got to think that there has to be a program right now that is investigating kind of an alternate reality, like something that, the general population doesn't think is possible. Like paranormal. I don't really like that word because everything is paranormal before it becomes normal. Like just because we don't understand it, we call it paranormal. Like germs were paranormal at a certain point. You know, we th- if you, go a couple hundred years ago and tell people that there's tiny little organisms that are going to make you sick and this and that, like that was absurd. It was fantasy. So that germs are paranormal, viruses paranormal, that type of thing. But it becomes normal when we start to understand it. And I think that there's a lot going on that we just don't understand. That's why I don't scoff at or, discredit certain experiences that seem impossible, like, stuff like UFOs and all that. I think that there's a lot going on that we just don't understand.
It sort of makes me think, we were talking about Donald Hoffman, and to me, that's a guy who's on the cutting edge of like the absolute peak of what we can possibly know, understand, and experience. But why should a guy who is easily accessible to us, who writes books, who goes on podcasts, why should that guy be the pinnacle of our current understanding of what's happening? Like, it makes me think that there are scientists, doctors, researchers that are behind closed doors, hired by people who have more power um, and influence than us. The same way in which Jeffrey Epstein would target scientists to bring to his island because he was super interested in, furthering our scientific knowledge. So who's to say that there aren't billionaires and government people and um, individuals who are in a higher level of power than us that have access to these types of research programs and scientists who we don't know their names, and they are furthering things in a way that we can't even contemplate it seems that it's a pretty good possibility. And you hear people like, I mean, I know it might sound controversial to even bring this dude's name up, but you hear Alex Jones talk about um, some of the crazy government programs that they have researching altered states of consciousness and DMT and stuff like that. And believe me, I'm not like a proponent of everything Alex Jones says, but you see little bits and pieces of it
Yeah.
leaking, and
And
you see from different sources little bits and pieces coming into our collective. And I mean, who knows really?
yeah, I mean, well, we know that, MK Ultra, they experimented on people with LSD and whatnot.
But we never get the results. Notice that? We never really get the conclusions. They just release the actual studies to us after, 50 years or 60 years or so, but we never get the results, the conclusions.
Yeah, and like you said, like they probably have, people behind closed doors doing that stuff. And now we know as fact that they do because with ALSAP, like I said, that was a program that was doing those things. And like you mentioned Robert Bigelow, or sorry, you mentioned billionaires, which Robert Bigelow is a billionaire who had like the NIDS program, National Institute of Discovery Science, and he, put millions and millions of dollars into this type of research too. And so it's definitely happening, and there's a reason why we don't hear about it. I think it's kind of a whole shattering a paradigm that's happening. I mean, we all live in the physicalist paradigm where we believe that reality is a certain way, and now people are starting to realize it isn't that way. And I think a lot of people in higher positions know that as well. Partially, that's what's going on with this UAP, UFO topic. So, like, they just had a congressional hearing a couple weeks ago, and it was the first time in 50 years they had a congressional hearing about UFO. And since it was the first one since, Project Blue Book, where it was just a disinformation program to discount, UFO experiencers and stuff like that. So now this is the first time they've done that. And if you ask me what's happening now, is they talk about is UFO disclosure happening. And I think it's more of like a dissemination. Like they're slowly dripping us information to enter into like a new paradigm because the people that like worked in OSAP and all these different programs who know things that we don't know about the UFO phenomenon, they understand that it's not as simple as, just like aliens and spaceships flying here. There's a lot of stranger things happening with the phenomenon. And I think it ties in to just the whole paradigm shift of us understanding that it's not necessarily like a physical reality the way we look at it, like a mechanical system. Because Skinwalker Ranch is a good example of this, and it's a place where the government spent millions of dollars and investigated for such a long time. So many different programs have been there. None of the stuff that was learned there is released. It's all hidden away. And but there were like UFOs being spotted there. There were like weird beings, like cryptic creatures, like wolves, like giant wolves. Somebody there saw like a dinosaur, like, shit like that just doesn't make sense, but credible people are seeing these things, like, very credible people, and now they're starting to talk about it a little bit, and I think the reason we have that, like, UFO congressional hearing is that we're gonna start to get, like, drops of information about a phenomenon happening on our planet that maybe we don't understand, but, it's a paradigm shifting event. And it won't happen like one day. They won't just say, "Oh, here's all the information." It's gonna take years and years of, you know, making movies and like they use it's proven too that they use, our popular culture like films and TV shows to start putting these ideas into our head. So it's interesting. But I would say that there are definitely people working on this stuff on a high level, and I think that we're starting to learn a little more about it in our culture, and I think we're gonna keep getting more information. Now we're having UFO congressional hearings, like, every 180 days, like, every 6 months, they're gonna have a new one, and they're gonna start showing you more videos and a little more information, but it's not gonna be, anything too, groundbreaking at first because if they would come out and say, "Yeah, like, Bigfoot's real and aliens are here," and all like, people would laugh it off, they wouldn't believe it. It has to be, like, a slow drop of information each time that is like gonna work its way into the collective consciousness so we can start to understand what this intelligence or intelligences are that are, operating on the planet. And I'm not crazy because I'm telling you, like, it it is uh it is known now in the public that the UFO, UAP are real. It's just that we don't know what they are, and that's what's being said. But based off of basically everything I was just saying, I think that we know way more than is being fed to the public. They have, like, tons of video evidence and, radar evidence, stuff like this. So, I think we're gonna start getting more of that, which is interesting.
Now, to me, in my own little world of confirmation bias, if what they're telling us and if what they show us, like if this is true, what you're saying, and if they do slowly start to roll out these things and we're getting, small little slow drips of information, like a little, IV, um, if this doesn't eventually lead to a connection with the shamanic cultures of the world and how they experience entities and travel through different realms and communicate with ancestor spirits as they call them and things like that, it's a lie if they don't relate to that. You know what I mean? Because in my view and from what I've experienced with psychedelics and with shamanism and studying different spiritual cultures and things like that is what these people are doing is real in the Amazon and in these shamanic cultures. They're using whatever they're finding within these realms to physically and mentally heal people. And to me, these are the most legit practices of like extra dimensional things um, that have ever been shown to us. So in my little, like I said, my little world of confirmation bias, I do believe that the government gives us information that's false in order to make us believe certain things. And it seems plausible that they would lie about the small drips of information that you're referring to. And the way that I'm going to gauge that is how close does it come to shamanic cultures, to what we've experienced with psychedelics and other spiritual traditions? Because, if you follow the money, like you were saying, all the millions of dollars that were put into programs like MK Ultra, like the research that was done at Skinwalker Ranch, um, the remote viewing information, and studies that they have found conclusions to. These things are another form, like I was saying earlier, like they sort of validate one another. And the way that they validate one another, aside from just being related in general as ideas, is there was a lot of money put into all of these things, and we did not get any specifics on the results of them, which is how I think they relate to the UAP and the alien stuff too. I feel like this stuff is all connected in some way, shape, or form. And if they don't help us to make that connection, then I'm not sure they actually have any real information that we don't.
Well, I'll say this, like, they definitely have tons of information because 'cause they're the people with the unlimited resources. So if we
Sure.
know anything, they have the resources to really engage with this phenomenon, and but
My question being,
well,
do these resources, can they get you to the same place that shamanic cultures get with nature?
yeah, guaranteed. But my point I wanted to touch on is, like you said, like, the drops being false and this and that. Well, we know that for 70 years that they purposefully fed the public disinformation about this topic. So we are conditioned, like, purposefully to scoff at the subject and talk about it here like it's not a real thing when it's been revealed by whistleblowers and, it's just it's kind of out in the open now, and there's been so many millions of people that have seen these things that it is a real phenomenon, but we don't just accept it because first of the paradigm we live in doesn't allow for it really. And I mean, some if you're really open-minded, you're gonna start to, accept some of this stuff a little more, but we have been conditioned to laugh at it and scoff at it. So they've also spent millions of dollars doing that, trying to get us to think of it as fantasy. But through, like I said, whistleblowers and things like that, there's starting to be a change. And it wasn't purposeful by the government. The government didn't want to start releasing these documents. It really just happened through the Freedom of Information Act and whistleblowers kind of just saying things. And then that's when they created from OSAP, that program I was talking about, there was like a little program that branched off from that called ATIP, and it was like Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. And they didn't go into the crazy stuff like Skinwalker Ranch, like, and all the really weird paranormal stuff. This was a smaller program that was just about, tracking UFOs, getting information on them, trying to figure stuff out. So that's where you get all those, like, videos that the Pentagon was forced to release and this. And the only reason we know about that is because, the one of the guys that led ATIP, Lou Elizondo, um he was a former counterintelligence guy, like top security, all the clearances he had, all that, and they put him in charge of this ATIP program, and he resigned because he was frustrated that he wasn't able to tell the public anything about it. So he wasn't allowed to, release any information that he was working on that taxpayers were, providing. He's kind of like a patriot type, like he's like one of those guys, like he was in the military and this and that. So he went rogue basically, and he was ahead of that program, and he started talking about it. And basically, to make a long story short, through a lot of moving pieces, it forced a hand that the Pentagon had to start, making these congressional hearings happen and start alerting Congress on this stuff. Like basically, the cat was out of the bag that we've been spending a lot of money investigating this stuff over the last like 70 years.
So that's why you think they're dripping it to us, is because they were kind of caught in the act.
I think it's I don't think it's like a huge, like, conspiracy really. I think that it's yes, that they were caught in the act. There's a small group of people that want to disclose this information, and they have all the information. Like they have a lot of info. They don't know everything. I don't believe. I mean, I think that maybe they're very lost on the topic because it's that strange. But uh, like Lou Elizondo is a good example. It's just they forced the hand of the government. That's why when you get these congressional hearings, it's like ridiculous. They're not telling us anything. They're still like denying it a lot. Like they don't want to, talk about this stuff and they don't, but now that Congress has been alerted about it, now they are demanding answers too. So now we have our elected officials in there really being being shown like videos that aren't, classified videos of this stuff. So now they're asking questions and through like a long process, I think that we will start getting the information, not because they want to, but now enough people know, enough people have seen them, a lot of people experience stuff that they have to say something. And we know for a fact that they're putting our money into it. So I don't think that they're going to outright say anything big, but I think through time, they're going to have to say something. And there's enough people, trustworthy people, that do know things and are connected, that are involved, that are trying to get the information out. And with the internet and all the cameras, like it's just too hard to keep something this big under wraps. So I think it's slowly starting to come out.
Now, I've always had questions about the Freedom of Information Act because this is a rule or a law that was put into place and enforced by a government that is known for its secrets. So, how confident can we be that the Freedom of Information Act is going to give us access to information or like a depth of information that is actually legit?
Well, it will give you legit information, but doesn't mean you can get a hold of all information. So it'll basically get us like you could get access to things like ATIP and OSAP, like things that were happening. But like for instance, you can't do a FOIA on like our current weapon systems and stuff like that. Like there's things that are just way beyond, classified. But there is, so much information that there's so much information now, it's unbelievable, because nobody understood that the internet was coming either. They couldn't grasp how big the internet would be. So now we all have the internet, and if you really want to, you can look into a lot of this stuff, and if you actually go into it with an open mind and do your due diligence in researching some of this stuff, it is clear that what's going on. It's absolutely clear that some higher intelligence is engaging with humanity. And it could be a bunch of different phenomenon, or it might be one phenomenon that manifests itself in any different way. Like one theory is one theory is that for instance, like you talk about like the shamanic stuff, or you talk about even religions, like the reason that it is showing itself to us as UFOs now is because now in our culture we connect to technology. Like, it shows itself in a way that we can understand. So, like, let's say a couple 100 years ago, it might show itself in a different form, like, not a piece of technology because they didn't have technology. It's There's a lot of ideas behind it, but, from what I understand, nobody actually knows what's going on, but there are a lot of people that you can hear too that talk about having experiences, which are really interesting.
It's fascinating stuff. It's a really interesting subject. And I agree with you. I don't really think people or there's anyone out there that really knows. But I think that there's more information out there than we have.
Well, yeah, there's people that know, like, way more, like, for instance, there's known video, like, they have high resolution video of this stuff that, I think this is what I think that we will 100%, we will get the videos of the UFOs and stuff. We're gonna get that. We got those 3, infrared videos, and they have even just the congressional hearing they just had, they released another video, but it was, like, filmed with, like, an iPhone from a cockpit, and it was just like a spherical object that went by, like, so fast, It was, nothing special. It was an iPhone video in the sky through a cockpit. But they talk about they have a 23-minute video of a UAP engaging with a pilot, like an F-18 or something. So these videos exist, and I think we will get those. But one of the reasons we won't is because they have the excuse to not show us the videos because, like, for instance, that 23-minute video, they can't just show it to us because it will the videos release more information than just what's being shown. Like it'll show what weapon systems we're using, like the type of cameras, it's bad for our adversaries to see that stuff. And for instance, we don't know if we were flying over like restricted territory of another nation when this happened. So like we can't just put out a video that shows us flying our top secret military equipment over North Korea or something, you know what I mean? So there's a lot of things that they can go to say, "No, we can't show you this because X, Y, or Z."
So it seems to me that the violent, greedy, warring tendencies of humans are preventing us from, again, collectively agreeing on information being true. Therefore, it seems that we are limiting our own evolution in the way that we conduct ourselves, you know, with other nations, other people, because we're always looking to hide our technology just in case we want to kill everybody across the world. And again, it seems to me that maybe the reason that, if what you're saying is true, that these extra dimensional beings do give us information and kind of cloak themselves in ways that we can understand, is to slowly raise our collective consciousness to a level where maybe we stop killing each other. Maybe we stop dropping bombs on one another. Maybe the weapon systems aren't the focal point of the reason why we release information or keep information.
Yeah, and like you said, like, it's sad, but, like, everything is national security this, national security that, which in the world we live in, it's true. We do need to, make that our priority so we have security or the illusion of security. Um, but thankfully, there's handfuls of people that know this stuff and do want to get information out. But they are respectable people and, like, they're not just going to break their oath and just, like, shout information. I think it's gonna be released in a very strategic, informed way, and it's I'll tell you, it's coming. That's what there's it's already happening right now. So people that are interested in the topic on this topic, they know this. For the average person, they are starting to hear it a little bit more because, like I said, the congressional hearings, they put it on mainstream TV a bit. But there's so much information on the internet now that you can really verify a lot of this stuff that's been going on for yourself by just looking it up. Like I said, the government has been piling a lot of money into this. Um, and it's only a matter of time before we start getting more videos, which is interesting. I like seeing the videos because it's crazy. But for now, the government is claiming that they have no idea what they are, but they're not ours, and they aren't our like adversaries. So there's something flying around that we don't know what it is, and it can overperform everything that we have. But my point of view is that it's far beyond just nuts and bolts craft like UFO. Like it's a part of a bigger phenomenon that's happening that is intelligent and is interacting with us. 'Cause I mean, you look at people, there's credible people that are quote unquote experiencers, like people, high level CIA people that have seen this stuff and experienced it. Like, for instance, with Skinwalker Ranch, there's an effect, they call it the hitchhiker effect, where if you go to the ranch and you see something or something happens to you, it like follows you home. Basically, the way I look at it is like once the gate is open, you can't close it. So like let's say, somebody sees something sinister, like something weird on the ranch, then, they could live halfway across the country and they start getting this stuff happening in their house or like around their home. Like they'll see orbs or some weird type of stuff like that. And They call it the hitchhiker effect, I think, because they believe it's something like following them, but I think it's more of like you opened a gate that can't be closed. So now you're seeing things that you couldn't see before necessarily, and it's presenting itself to you more. And this is interesting because it's like high level CIA guys that swear by it and they talk about it. You know, they try to hush hush this stuff, but there are people out there that talk about the hitchhiker effect and the reality of it. And it's really interesting.
Yeah, to me, it seems like it's extra dimensional. Like if I'm gonna just like speculate on my own, because I honestly I don't think that, if we look at the information that the government's giving us or any information we can find online, I don't think it's responsible to make conclusions and to sort of like attach yourself to the beliefs of whatever conclusions that you're trying to make, because there's just no way to make a valid conclusion. There's not enough information. But what I will say is that if I am tasked with sort of coming up with my own little imaginary conclusion, I think it's probably interdimensional, probably has something to do with consciousness. And I believe that the earth gives us certain chemicals in order for us to poke through to that dimension, to gain information, maybe to get like a little bit of an experiential view of what's actually out there, what is actually coming to contact us. If it is something with some sort of like motivation, I mean, who knows? It seems when you go into certain psychedelic experiences that there is a motivation, there is an intelligence, and there's something that is driving whatever you're experiencing, and that it loves you and it cares about you. And I mean, ultimately, the way I look at these things, I don't tend to fear any of this kind of stuff, because to me and what I've experienced and what I've learned is that, and I always say this, it's all love. And I think that the extra dimensional beings, whatever they may be, I think love is what dominates in those realms, because I think love is the basis of evolution and the basis of pretty much everything that is real beyond real.
Yeah. Love is the bee's knees. That's what it is. It's the cat's pajamas. But as far as like you said, as a conclusion, there is no conclusion other than that the phenomenon is real, and anybody who claims to have a conclusion or an answer, you should be wary of them because they're either lying or they could be uh kind of, they might just not nobody knows officially, I'll put it that way. The phenomenon is real, and any other conclusion is just speculation. So, like anybody who claims to know what it is, there's no way to really believe them for sure. But as far as the information that you can find online and the FOIA stuff, I give that all credit. Like certain information you can find is just leaked and it's real stuff, but all the real stuff isn't conclusive to what it is or a motive or anything like that. But it is proof that it is here and being investigated. That's the only proof you're going to get. You're not going to see any proof of a motive or what it even is, but you'll be able to follow paper trails and listen to people that worked on these projects talk about that it is a real thing happening and they just don't understand it basically. And that goes into, like I said, uh, how you said, consciousness is a part of it. Well, it's yeah, a huge part of it. I mean, especially if you're of the belief that consciousness is fundamental. And I think once you start coming around to that idea and looking through that lens, it makes these experiences and all this stuff seem a lot more realistic.